Okay, so today we're going to be installing a full auto reset shocker pass positive air shutoff system on this 2013 GMC Denali HD with the Duramax engine. We're going to go ahead and wrap the front end and the fenders all with green protective tape just so that we don't scratch the fenders. It's our general practice that we do that on all of our installations. Okay, so this is the kit that we're going to install today in our 2013 GMC Denali HD with the Duramax engine. This kit comes with everything that we are going to need for our installation today. We have our installation instructions, our stickers for when you're completed saying that it's protected by the shocker pass positive air shutoff system, our full auto reset valve, plug and play wiring harness, our R5 rev limiter box, circuit breaker, the in-cab keypad, as well as our anti-crush sleeve and your clamps and hoses that are going to be needed. So we're going to go ahead and start installing this. So on page 9 of our installation instructions, it's going to say that you need to install the 68 k ohm resistor if you are using the crank or cam sensor signal. So on this page you will see that the 68 k ohm resistor is attached to the paper. You're going to take that 68 k ohm resistor and you are going to put it in series between the cam or crank sensor and the rev limiter box. So you need to cut and bare the wires and then install the 68 k ohm resistor in line. Then solder your connections. After that, we choose to cover it with a rigid shrink wrap tubing. So when you are completed, it is going to look similar to this. Okay, so the first step for our valve installation is we need to remove the airbox and the inlet pipe as well as the tray that the airbox sits in. So we're going to go ahead and remove those parts and then move on to the next step. Okay, so we went ahead and unhooked the batteries and we took out the air intake box as well as the tray and the support stand that will be located right here. That also has to come out. Then the next step is going to be we're going to remove this entire intake air elbow that comes from the intercooler right up to the intake of the engine here, as our valve is going to end up being located in this position. So we're going to go ahead and take this out and then we will remove this piece. Okay, so we're at the part of the installation where we need to actually cut the existing air inlet pipe that goes from the intercooler right up to the intake of the engine. So I just wanted to show you kind of what it looks like when we're done. So I'm going to take this apart, show you what it is that we started with. And you can find all of this in our instruction packet that comes in the kit. So when we started out, this was actually on the one end of the hose as well as this. So it looked something similar to that. Now to get this apart, you have to be very careful because you end up cutting these. This was one piece, so you end up having to cut these off. They actually work as a fixed clamp once they're on there. So you can take a die grinder or you know, any kind of a little saw, Dremel, anything like that, and you're going to end up cutting this off of that pipe to get it to come free. On the engine side, you leave this end alone. That's why you have to be careful when you cut this and the hose off that you don't damage this, because this actually ends up holding on our hoses. On this other end, you know, it's always good to be careful anyway, but you don't have to be as careful because you end up cutting this much off of it, as it is also shown by this blue line in our instructions. So you end up cutting that off. Then you have to polish the inside of this pipe. It's mostly just on this rib here where you have to just buff a little bit, and that's where you install the anti-crush sleeve that I showed you earlier. Okay, so previously we showed that the air box has to be removed as well as the air inlet pipe and the tray that the air box sits in. Then we showed you on the bench how this air intake pipe needs to be cut to make provisions to install the automatic reset valve. So I just loosely put the air box back in here so that I can show you what the finished product is going to look like. I'm going to go ahead and take this out. So that you can see the orientation of the way the clamps need to be sitting. on all 4 clamps, as well as the valve itself. It needs to, this is a very, very tight install, and the valve needs to sit exactly like this, just to ensure that you have adequate clearance around everything. These lines, there's a bracket that goes to the back of the alternator in here that it needs to have clearance, obviously, so it won't rub through the pipe, and also so that the valve itself or the clamps do not contact the airbox lid cover, because obviously if it does, it's going to puncture a hole in the cover and cause a fresh air leak where you could dust the motor. So if you orientate your valve just like this with the clamps just like so, it fits with adequate clearance everywhere that you need it to. Okay, so we're at the part of our installation where we're going to mount our rev limiter box and circuit breaker. We already went ahead and mounted the circuit breaker here, so it'll actually be covered later with this plastic housing. You always want to make sure before you do anything with the electronics that you have your battery disconnected. We're going to mount the rev limiter box right here on this panel. So we're now going to mount our interior keypad. We went and removed some of these interior panels for ease of routing our wiring through the firewall. So to mount this keypad, there's a nut that is on the back, a jam nut. So you just have to undo this nut, take it off of your wiring, then you drill a hole through an interior panel so that this can slide through. Then you simply just put your jam nut back on to sandwich it onto the panel. We have found for this application that the keypad is best suited right here. There's nothing in behind it that the wiring can chafe on, and the stem can fit through with no issues. Okay, so we're at the part of our installation where we're going to be tagging in for our RPM signal from our rev limiter box. So we are tagging in at the crank position sensor signal from the, this is the rearmost plug at the PCM, which is pin 61. It's a white wire with a black trace for this application. So we tied into this wire here, we soldered the connection and then taped it all up. So now we can go ahead and replug this back into the PCM and run our yellow wire up to the rev limiter box. Okay, so previously I showed you where we were going to mount our rev limiter box, so I went ahead and actually mounted ours just where we said. Then on this one I've already ran our wiring harness to all of its locations. I just want to show you exactly where those are. So this connector just simply plugs into the bottom of our rev limiter box. Once you've plugged it in, you just push up this white locking tab. Then you know it's on and it's done. This 3-wire part off of the harness, the white, red, and black wire that are in this Delphi connector, end up plugging directly into the positive air shutoff valve. Then for the rest of these connections, this yellow wire is for your RPM signal. The brown wire is actually not used in this application. The green and the blue wire go into the cab to our test pad, and the red and the black go directly to the battery. Okay, so we showed you the location where we were going to put our keypad. We installed that and put all the interior panels back together and ran our wires through the firewall. So there's 3 wires on the back of this keypad. The green and the blue go to the rev limiter box, as we have shown you, and this black wire, this needs to be drugged straight to the battery negative. Sometimes we see where guys do them to a screw in behind the dash or whatever, but this can lead to poor grounds and failure of the system. So we always recommend that you run this ground directly to the battery. Okay, so we're now at the setup portion of our installation. I went and unbolted our box from here so that I can gain access to our set button that is located on the back of our box. We put it on the back here so that it keeps it from getting tampered with, because you really only ever need to use the set button one time, and that's for your original installation. Once it is set, it's stored for good. So we're going to go through the setup portion. I have an assistant in the cab that is going to be running the throttle for me and monitoring our TAC RPM. We're going to be setting this for half speed, so we're going to be setting our target RPM for 2500 RPM. That means that our engine in real world scenario will kill at 5000 RPM. which we have found is the proper target RPM for this style of truck. So I'm going to go ahead and have my assistant started here in a minute. I will hit the set button. You will see green LED is lit. That means that it's ready for setup. So then I'm going to have him start it, achieve our half speed RPM of 2500. Then I'm going to hit the set button again, and you will see that our green LED, or that the LED light should flash green. That's saying that it has saved our target RPM. If it flashes red, that means that it did not store the saved input, that we have a connection issue, or it's not recognizing the crank position sensor. Okay, so go ahead and start it and bring it up to 2500, please. Now going to hit the test port, and then my assistant is going to bring it up to confirm that it is killing at 2500 RPM. Okay, go ahead. Okay, so that worked out really good. Now our unit is shut down. It's not going to allow it to reset for 15 seconds. Once the box has seen that there has been no recorded engine RPM for 15 seconds, it will trigger our automatic reset valve to reopen. Okay, so we've now completed our setup of the unit as we previously showed you. Basically at the end of this now we want to test our in-cab keypad. So this has two functions. One function is so that you can manually trip the valve just by hitting this trip button. As I previously stated, if you command the valve to shut, after it has not seen any engine RPM for 15 seconds, it will automatically reset itself. So you never need to, after a manual trip, go through the trouble of opening up the hood to reset the valve or anything like that. It does it all on its own. So now we are going to show how to manually test our shutdown RPM from in the cab. So now remember, our shutdown RPM for this engine is 5,000 RPM. When we put it in test mode, it is going to shut it down at 2,500 RPM. So I'm going to go ahead and start it so that we can show you how to perform this test. Once your engine is started, simply press the test button on the keypad. Now we are going to take up our engine RPM to 2,500. As soon as the box read 2,500 engine RPM, it automatically shut down the valve, which, remember, in real-world scenario, it will actually kill at 5,000 engine RPM. Okay, so we've now completed our installation of our full auto reset on this 2013 GMC Denali HD. I do recommend after any installation that you take it for a good test drive, just to make sure that you don't have any boost leaks, that you can take it up to full engine RPM with no issues. After several trips, if you have been testing the unit, you may end up having a check engine light that is thrown. If this happens, you'll have to reset it with the scan tool. It's no big deal. It causes no damage of any kind. If you have any questions of any kind, feel free to phone our technical support lines. We have people standing by. And thank you very much for the purchase of your Shocker Pass positive air shutoff system.